Imagine a kingdom where gold shone like the sun, where a single man ruled with a wisdom that defied all human understanding. His name was Solomon. His legacy, the most majestic temple never built. Its mystery, a harem of 1,000 women. How could handle such power and desire? Was it his divine intelligence or its perdition? In a 10th century BC, the King Solomon ruled Israel in what was considered his golden age. Son of the legendary King David, Solomon inherited a prosperous kingdom and a divine mandate to build a temple to house the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred manifestation of the presence of God in the earth. Under his reign, Jerusalem was transformed in a splendid city with a temple of gold and stone that dazzled those who it contemplated. But his wisdom was not only reflected in his government. He was also famous for his personal life, marked by the largest harem of the history of Israel, 700 wives and 300 concubines. They were not simple companions, but key pieces of his political strategy. With each marriage, Solomon sealed an alliance with neighboring kingdoms, ensuring peace and trade in his territory. However, this harem was not just a symbol of power. It was also an immense burden on the economy of the kingdom and, according to the scriptures, a key factor in the fall of his dynasty. Maintaining so many women and their servants required exorbitant resources, which led to an increase in the taxes and the discontent of the town. The story of Solomon is shrouded in mystery. He is said to have possessed a magic ring that allowed to command the demons and use them to build the temple. Also that their foreign wives they brought gods with them, pagans who led astray his faith and provoked the wrath of Yahweh. So, Solomon, was he wisest king ever has existed, or a man whose ambition it led to the ruin? Today, we will explore every aspect of his reign, his temple and his harem, unraveling the secrets of his life and the impact it had in the history. Get ready to discover the truth behind the mystery. Solomon's temple was not just a building. For the Israelites, it was the proof that God had chosen his people. For neighboring kingdoms, it was a demonstration of power and wealth. And for Solomon, it was the masterpiece that would define his legacy. His construction took 7 years and required the effort of 180,000 workers, from stonemasons and carpenters to goldsmiths who decorated every corner with precious metals. The dimensions of the temple were imposing, 30 meters long, 10 meters wide, and 15 meters high. Although it was not the largest building of its time, its design and materials it converted in a wonder. Its walls were covered with pure gold, which caused the sun to reflect a golden light on Jerusalem at dawn, a spectacle that inspired both devotion and amazement. Every detail of the temple had a sacred meaning. At the entrance, stood 2 enormous bronze columns, called Jachin and Boaz, symbols of stability and strength. Inside, the priests performed sacrifices and ceremonies without interruption, and in it deeper, protected by a veil, was his Sancta Sanctorum, the most sacred place in the entire temple. There rested the Ark of the Covenant, Israel's most sacred object, which contained the tables with the 10 Commandments. But the construction of the temple was surrounded by a mystery. It was said that none iron tool had been used in his building. The stone blocks. They arrived at the site already carved and ready to be assembled in complete silence. They believed that this was a symbol of respect for God, avoiding the noise of the violence in a holy place. Others, they claimed that Solomon used knowledge advanced in architecture and mathematics to achieve it. But there is who they claim that the king possessed a magic ring with the one who controlled supernatural entities that helped build the temple. Beyond the myths, it is true that the magnificence of the temple had a high cost. To finance its construction, Solomon imposed increasingly higher taxes on their people, yielded cities whole to the allied kings in exchange for materials and labor. While the nobility and priests celebrated the completion of the work, the peasants and artisans suffered the weight of an increasingly demanding economy. Solomon's temple became in the center of Israel's spiritual and political life. But the opulence of his kingdom did not end in the gold of its walls. In the corridors of your palace, in a world of exotic perfumes and refined silks, was found his other great symbol of power, its harem, an enigma of beauty, intrigue, and diplomacy. Inside the majestic Solomon's palace, beyond the living room's golden and exotic gardens, there was a world hidden from the eyes of the village. A place where the beauty was a currency and politics was woven between perfumes and silks. The harem of the king was not simply a space of pleasure. It was a strategy, a chessboard in which each wife represented a carefully calculated alliance. Solomon had 700 royal wives and 300 concubines. These women were not chosen at random. Each marriage was a pact, a way of guaranteeing peace with neighboring kingdoms to strengthen the economy and expand its influence. Egypt, Moab, Edom, Sidon, Ammon. Each of these villages had representation in her harem, and with it a gateway to Israel's power. For the king's foreigners, giving their daughters to Solomon was to ensure a privileged relationship with the most powerful man in the region. But not all wives arrived as part of diplomatic alliances. Some were selected for their beauty, her intelligence, or their talents in the art of seduction. Once inside the harem, these women, they lived surrounded by luxury unthinkable, perfumes brought from Arabia, fabrics very fine from Babylon, jewels encrusted with precious stones. However, their existence was full of restrictions. They couldn't go out freely, they could not interact with men out of the palace, and above all, they were subject to the willpower of the king. But how Solomon administered a harem so vast! It is said that there was a strict hierarchy. In the summit was the main wife, usually the daughter of a powerful king. Then the secondary wives, who also they had influence, although to a lesser degree. Finally, the concubines, who, although they did not enjoy the same authority, they could rise if they captured the attention of the monarch. Choosing a wife to spend the evening with the king was not casual. Before meeting with Solomon, every woman prepared herself for hours with beauty rituals that included scented oil baths, massages with rare essences, and the choice of the best clothes. In his palace, music, the dance, and the aromas enveloped the environment in an atmosphere almost magical, designed to cast a spell the senses. At first glance, the haremit seemed a paradise. But in the shadows, rivalries, jealousies, and conspiracies were brewing. Some wives sought to make sure the favor of king, not only for them, but for the children they could bear. Have a descendant with royal blood meant power, and in a world where the stability of a kingdom depended on politics, a son could become a weapon. But the harem not only represented pleasure and diplomacy, it was also a burden. Maintaining so many women, servants, and eunuchs required enormous amounts of resources. And while the court enjoyed a luxury unprecedented, the town began to feel the weight of an economy that could no longer sustain such opulence. When the sun was setting over Jerusalem and the light of the lamps, golden, illuminated the corridors of the palace, the Solomon's harem awakened to a different reality. There, the beauty was not a simple attribute, but a refined art that was perfected every day through rituals designed to delight the king. Every woman in her harem had the possibility of being elected, but for that should prepare with care. The day began with bathrooms in alabaster vats, where they were immersed in perfumed oils brought from lands distant. Myrrh, sandalwood, incense, and roses created an enveloping fragrance, leaving the soft and silky skin. Then, the maids applied massages with aromatic ointments, while they braided her wives' hair with gold threads and pearls. The clothes were selected with great care. Linen fabrics, Egyptian silks imported from regions distant, robes adorned with precious stones. Every detail he counted, from the bracelets up to the rings, because everything had to shine under the light of the torches. When the night fell, the corridors of the palace were filled with music. The lute and harp melodies resounded in the air, while the women they practiced dances designed to hypnotize the senses. Soft, rhythmic movements, full of grace and mystery. It was a show designed for the seduction, to captivate the look of the king and record in his memory. Not all of them managed to capture their attention, but those who they did, could change their destiny. One night only with Solomon could mean a future of privileges within the harem, a position of influence, or even the possibility of giving birth to an heir. But the competition was fierce, and each woman I knew that, in any time, another could take his place. Beyond of the luxury and the beauty, the harem was a world of intrigue, where the seduction was not only a tool of pleasure, but also a survival strategy. While Solomon enjoyed his kingdom wrapped in perfumes and melodies, in the shadows of the palace were freed, silent battles, where cunning and skill-desire defined who would become in the monarch's favorite. Behind the splendor of the Solomon's harem hid a less brilliant reality. His maintenance represented a huge expense for the kingdom. It was not only about the 1,000 women who they were made up of, but of the enormous number of servants, eunuchs and guards necessary for their operation. Each wife and concubine had a personal entourage, made up of maidens, musicians, perfumers and artisans, in charge of providing the luxuries that made their lives an existence worthy of royalty. The finest fabrics, the most exotic oils, the more expensive spices. Everything was imported from lands far away and paid with the tributes of the people. The markets of Jerusalem were filled with caravans carrying chests full of gold, incense, and precious stones, intended to satisfy the demand for the palace. While the nobles they enjoyed the opulence, the peasants felt the weight of the taxes that increased every year to support the excesses of the court. The cost of feeding so many people was also an immense burden. The royal kitchen prepared feasts daily, with selected meats, fruits of the best orchards and wines that came from the most refined wineries in the Mediterranean. In a single banquet could sacrifice oneself dozens of lambs and bulls, while the cooks they worked without rest to keep a supply palace that never slept. But discontent was growing. The citizens of Israel, who in a principle had admired the wealth of the kingdom, they began to question the sacrifices that had to be made due to maintain a system that benefited only a few. Murmurs spread throughout the streets of Jerusalem, and the nobility, blinded by the luxury, did not perceive the gathering storm. Solomon, with all his wisdom, was not oblivious to these problems. He knew that the weight of the harem on the economy of the kingdom was huge, but its network of alliances depended on it. Give up your foreign wives meant to weaken the political ties that there were built with so much effort. It was a trap without output. If maintained, he harem would exhaust the resources of the people. If so reduced, would lose his support from neighboring kingdoms. What in a principle had been a symbol of power and stability, now it was transformed into a threat to Israel's future. But the kingdom's problems did not only come from the economy. Something darker began to take shape within the palace, the influence of his foreign wives and the gods they brought with them. While Solomon's palace, was a world of luxuries and conspiracies, the temple that there was built followed an unwavering routine of devotion and rituals. From the dawn until the night, the priests worked without rest to maintain the sacred ceremonies that ensured the divine protection over Israel. Daily began with the sound of the shofars, ram's horns that announced the beginning of the sacrifices. In the main altar, bulls, lambs, and birds were offered to Yahweh, and their blood was poured out on the sacred stone. The smoke of burning flesh ascended to heaven like a bridge between the men and God, while the priests recited prayers that only they knew. Inside the temple, the light from the golden chandeliers illuminated the walls covered with gold and cedar. The aroma of the incense floated in the air, creating an atmosphere of mystery and reverence. The Levites in charge of sacred music sang psalms and hymns in a ritual that never ceased. Every action had a meaning. Each object was loaded with symbolism. In the center of the temple, behind a thick purple linen curtain, was his Sancta Sanctorum, the holiest place in all of Israel. No one could enter there except the high priest, and only once a year in a Yom Kippur day. Inside, in the absolute darkness, rested the Ark of the Covenant, the most venerated object of the faith Hebrew. It was said to contain the tables of the Ten Commandments, and that the presence of God dwelt upon them decked golden. But there were disturbing rumors. Some they believed that whoever looked directly at the Ark would die instantly. Others they claimed that the Ark possessed an indescribable power, capable of defeating armies or bringing calamities upon those who they will try steal it. It was even said that the Solomon's wisdom came from his closeness with this divine object. The temple was not only the spiritual heart of Israel, but also a reminder of the pact between the people and their God. However, that covenant was beginning to weaken. Beliefs, foreigners, brought by Solomon's wives, slowly infiltrated the nation. And with they, the faith of the king began to wobble. Solomon's wisdom was legendary, but many, they believed that their power went beyond the human intelligence. He was said to possess a magic ring, a seal recorded with the name of God, that you allowed to control forces invisible and know the secrets of the universe. Some, they claimed that with that ring could talk with the animals, understand the people's thoughts, and even subdue their own demons to do his bidding. The most amazing stories, they claimed that Solomon had not only ruled over the men, but also about spiritual beings. According to ancient traditions, used his mystical knowledge to force supernatural entities to work in the construction of the temple. The stories tell that he ordered the demons carving huge blocks of stone, erecting impossible pillars, and digging hidden tunnels beneath Jerusalem. The temple itself is said to have, it was imbued with divine energy, protected by sacred invocations and seals, invisible. But not only was there talk of his dominion over the spirits, some ancient writings, such as the Testament of Solomon, describe as a king with access to knowledge forbidden, capable of curing diseases, altering the weather, and foreseeing the future. It was said that with a single glance he could discern a person's destiny, and that through his rituals he obtained answers to questions that no one another mortal could know. These stories have been the subject of speculation for centuries. Was Solomon really a man with supernatural powers, or simply a ruler with a superior intelligence? Some, they believe that their wisdom came from his closeness with the Ark of the Covenant, while others, they assure that their knowledge of the occult arts became in a figure surrounded by mystery. However, his dominion was not absolute. Despite all his greatness, something began to weaken his reign. His wives, brought from lands distant, they not only brought with them political alliances, but also their own beliefs. Little by little, new gods, they began to overshadow the God of Israel. What once was a glorious and blessed kingdom was beginning to fragment under the weight of its own opulence. Foreign influence, coupled with growing discontent in the people, prepared the scenario for the fall of the dynasty of Solomon. What began as a political strategy ended becoming in a crack in Solomon's kingdom. His foreign wives not only brought alliances, but also their own customs and beliefs. With the time, the influence of these cults began to grow within Israel, challenging the exclusive devotion to Yahweh. It was said that Solomon, in his eagerness to please his wives, allowed the construction of temples and altars dedicated to God's foreigners. In the hills near Jerusalem were erected sanctuaries for deities such as Astarte, of the Sidonians, Milcom, of the Ammonites, and Chemosh, of the Moabites. There they performed sacrifices and rituals that little by little were gaining followers among the town, the priests of Yahweh. They warned the king about the dangers of allowing such practices. The law of Moses prohibited the worship of others' gods, and the introduction of foreign cults was seen as a betrayal of the covenant with the God of Israel. But Solomon, blinded by his harem and by the desire to maintain the harmony in his palace, ignored these warnings. The people began to split. Some they followed faithful to Yahweh, while others, influenced by the nobility, adopted new rites and beliefs. The stability that Solomon had built with his wisdom began to stagger, and with she, the unit of the kingdom. But the price of these decisions was not long in coming and arrive. According to the scriptures, Yahweh was indignant with Solomon and decreed that after his death the kingdom would be divided. And so it happened. Shortly after his death, Israel was fragmented into two kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. The golden age arrived at his end, and the nation never reached again the glory that he had under his reign. Solomon, the wisest man of the world, there was built an empire of gold and power, but its own decisions they took to the ruin. Its temples, its riches, and its harem could not save it of the destiny that he same there was tissue. What began as a reign of splendor ended with the seed of the division. But was it his harem the true cause of his fall? Or was there deeper forces in game? Solomon's reign was a paradox. His wisdom it became in one of the most enigmatic figures of the history, but its decisions they took to the decay. He built the most majestic temple never seen, but allowed the worship of gods foreigners. He ruled with intelligence and strategy, but his obsession with the luxury and marriage policy weakened his legacy. Solomon's temple was one of the major works of the antiquity, a symbol of the covenant between God and Israel, but its construction demanded enormous sacrifices of the people, their harem. It was a manifestation of his power, but also an unbearable burden that exhausted the resources of the kingdom. His alliance with neighboring kingdoms, it made him powerful, but his permissiveness with the beliefs foreigners broke the spiritual unity of its town. After his death, the kingdom was divided. What had been a nation strong and prosperous was fractured in two, beginning an era of conflicts that were never resolved completely. With time, the temple was destroyed, and the greatness of Jerusalem was left reduced to ruins. But the Solomon story has not faded away. His figure continues wrapped in mystery, his writings still are studied, and his legacy continues to inspire questions. Did he really possess a magic ring that granted supernatural powers? Did he use demons to build the temple, or was it his wisdom what allowed achieve it? Was it victim of his own ambition, or simply did what any other king there would be made in your place? It is true that his history is still valid, that his history is. Its proverbs continue transmitting life lessons. His name, it is still synonymous with wisdom, and its reign is remembered as a golden age that, despite its tragic end, left a mark indelible in the history. But now the question is for you. Do you believe that Solomon was the wisest king of the history, or its ambition it condemned? Was it his harem, a symbol of power, or its elderly weakness? Leave us your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories full of mystery and wisdom, ancient. See you in the next episode.